Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Bhante Sudasu, and good morning, our friends who are joining us for Sutta study. Today we will be studying the Mahādukkhakkhandha Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 13. That is one of Bradley's favorite suttas.
Wow, I didn't see that one coming.
Why? I think we all kind of say the same things.
Okay.
Like we read a sutta and we're like, this is my favorite sutta. Then you read another one, it's my favorite sutta. Another one is my favorite sutta. It's difficult to have just one favorite sutta in the Pali Canon. And good morning, Geeta and Michael, and of course, Bradley. Good morning. Hello, Ella from Poland. Hello, Jens, Kevin, Key from Australia, and Kyle from Brooklyn, New York. If you're still there, Kyle, I guess so. All right, so without further ado, we can start brightening the mind with this beautiful sutta.
Okay.
Pass it on to you, Bhante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So as mentioned, today we'll be looking at the Mahādukkhakkhandha Sutta, which is the 13th Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is translated here as the greater discourse on the mass of suffering, which is always a bit surprised when Bradley said it's one of his favorite suttas because it's all about suffering and the various drawbacks of sensuality and so on. So as usual, I'll start reading through the sutta and I'll give some explanations. And the general plan is to stop halfway through and finish up the second half tomorrow. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's grove in Anathapindika's park. Then many monks dressed in the morning took their bowls and robes and entered Savatthi for alms. Then it occurred to those monks, it is too early to go for alms in Savatthi. Perhaps we will approach the park where there are wanderers from other religions. So, as I've mentioned a number of times, in ancient India, there were many different spiritual traditions, many different religious traditions, and many different orders of monastics, wandering monastics as well as monastics which would live in particular places. And there's quite a number of suttas which involve Buddhist monks having conversations with the wandering monastics from other spiritual traditions. So the sutta continues. Then those monks approached the park where there were wanderers from other religions and conversed with them. When the appropriate polite conversation was finished, they sat to one side. When the monks were seated to one side, the wanderers said to them, Venerables, the contemplative Gautama teaches the complete understanding of sensuality, and we also teach the complete understanding of sensuality. The contemplative Gautama teaches the complete understanding of bodies, and we also teach the complete understanding of bodies. The contemplative Gautama teaches the complete understanding of feelings, and we also teach the complete understanding of feelings. Venerables, what is the distinction, the difference, the variation between the teachings and instructions given by the contemplative Gautama and those given by us? So there were, amongst all these different religious and spiritual traditions, there were some which were more similar to Buddhism and some which were more different. So this is something which comes up in a few places, which is people saying, well, there seems to be a lot of similarity between what we're doing and what the Buddhists are doing. So what's the difference? Why does the Buddha seem to think that we're doing different things? And there's other cases where it's very obvious that they're not doing the same thing at all. Or in cases like this, where the apparent similarity only goes so far. So this is something which still comes up to some extent these days. For example, often when people first become interested in Eastern religion, they often have a hard time telling the difference between things like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism. Because there's a lot of surface level similarities between a number of different Eastern religions. But as one digs deeper, it starts to become increasingly clear that there are, in fact, substantial differences in both the underlying concepts as well as in practices. So these wanderers, they say, basically they're saying it sounds like the Buddha is teaching basically the same stuff that we teach. So what's the difference? And it says in the Sutta, the monks neither approved of nor rejected the wanderer's statement. Instead, they rose from their seats and left, thinking, we will understand the meaning of this in the Blessed One's presence. So I like this. I like their humility. So rather than speak without knowing for sure what they were talking about, they recognized we actually don't have the sufficient knowledge to give a direct answer to this question. So they neither accepted nor rejected what the other wanderers were saying. So it's not like, no, you must be wrong. Buddhism is the best religion in the whole world. So therefore, it's automatically right and you're wrong. They didn't say that. Nor did they say, oh yeah, you're right. Hinduism, Buddhism, it's all the same. Instead, without answering, without either approving or rejecting, they said, let's find out what the Buddha has to say about this. So this is the right attitude. Whenever we encounter some uncertainty, rather than just bowl ahead and make some definitive statement, which is based on ignorance or incomplete knowledge, instead we should ask ourselves, well, what did the Buddha say about this? What would the Buddha have answered? And if we don't know, then it's time to crack open the suttas and find out. Or consult with monastics who are deeply familiar with the suttas and ask them where you can find information about these sorts of things. So always referring back to the Buddha's teachings, not relying upon our own ideas and opinions. Then after those monks had gone for alms and savati, finished their meal and returned from their alms round. This is an interesting little detail, by the way, that you'll see in the suttas, which is in the suttas, it always talks about the monks eating their food. Well, not always, but usually it talks about the monks eating their food before returning from alms round. Whereas in contemporary practice, normally the monks will return to the monastery after alms round and then eat sometime later in the day at the monastery. But apparently at the time of the Buddha, the custom was that one would go for alms and then eat while still in the village or perhaps at the edge of the village. And then after eating, then you would return to the monastery. So I find that an interesting little detail, though perhaps not of much relevance to the Dhamma itself. So they approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When they were seated to one side, they reported to the Buddha what had happened, the conversation with the wanderers. And then the Buddha said, monks, when wanderers from other religions say that, this is what you should say. Venerable, in relation to sensuality, what is the gratification? What is the drawback? And what is the escape? In relation to bodies, what is the gratification? What is the drawback? And what is the escape? In relation to feelings, what is the gratification? What is the drawback? And what is the escape? Monks, when wanderers from other religions are asked this, they will be unable to reply and will only get more distressed. For what reason? Monks, it is not their domain. Monks, I do not see anyone in this world of devas, maras, and brahmas, in this generation of contemplatives and brahmins with its celestial and human beings, that is able to satisfy the mind with an answer to these questions, except a Tathagata, a disciple of a Tathagata, or someone who has heard it from them. So here the Buddha, he's pointing out that it's necessary to analyze this question in terms of gratification, drawback, and escape. So this is a system which the Buddha brings up many places throughout the suttas. So analyzing things in terms of these three modes, the gratification, so acknowledging the pleasure that can come from certain conditional phenomena, the pleasure that can come from certain experiences in samsara, and the drawback, which is acknowledging the risk, the danger, the disadvantages of getting caught up in the pleasurable things. And the escape, which is how to train the mind so that we no longer get caught up in the unpleasantness of samsara. So we no longer get trapped by the things in samsara. And here again, he points out that people who practice other spiritual traditions can't give complete answers to these three questions. They might be able to give partial answers, but they can't give a complete answer because this is something which is only found within Buddhism. You cannot find this teaching within other spiritual traditions. So it's something which you can only hear from a Buddha or from one of the Buddha's disciples or someone who has learned it from one of the Buddha's disciples. So then he goes into the first one. He says, monks, in relation to sensuality, what is the gratification? Monks, there are these 5 strands of sensuality. What 5? Sights cognizable by the eye, which are desirable, enjoyable, pleasant, lovable, sensual, and exciting. Are you excited? Sounds cognizable by the ear, fragrances cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, which are desirable, enjoyable, pleasant, lovable, sensual, and excited. Monks, these are the 5 strands of sensuality. Monks, the pleasure and elation which arises dependent on these 5 strands of sensuality is the gratification in relation to sensuality. So this is a quite broad statement. Notice, though, that he's focusing particularly on the 5 physical senses, so he doesn't mention the mind. And this is quite common. When the Buddha talks about sensuality, sensual pleasure coming through sensory contact, he's usually talking about the 5 physical senses. Of course, there are also mind objects, which are pleasant and exciting and so on, but that's handled separately. So the 5 physical senses are seeing things that you like, that are pleasant and enjoyable, smelling things that are pleasant, tasting things that are pleasant, and so on. Touching things that are pleasant. So these are 5 ways that we seek pleasure. And this is something that you see from the moment a child is born until the moment a being dies. We're constantly seeking for pleasant sights, pleasant sounds, pleasant smells, pleasant tastes, and pleasant touches. So the first thing is to acknowledge the gratification, acknowledge that there is pleasure to be had through our 5 physical senses. If we pretend that the world is all suffering, well, that's just not the case. There are pleasant things. You can have a nice bowl of cereal in the morning. You can have a nice cup of coffee in the morning. You can have a nice bowl of ice cream for breakfast, for that matter, if you want to. You can go outside and smell the flowers. You can do all kinds of lovely things with your body and have all kinds of nice experiences with your body. So it's important to acknowledge that. But the Buddha says we should also be aware of the drawbacks. And this section goes on and on for quite a while, so bear with me. This is the fun part of the sutta. He says, monks, in relation to sensuality, what is the drawback? Monks, here a gentleman makes a living by means of some kind of job, whether scribing, accounting, calculating, farming, trading, cow herding, archery, government service, or some other job. I find it amusing that he starts the drawbacks of sensuality by talking about having a job. He must face cold and heat, suffer the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sunburn, and reptiles, and endure hunger and thirst. Monks, this is a visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The mass of suffering which is caused by sensuality originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. So, for example, we recently had a resident staying with us who eventually decided that they needed to leave the monastery and get a job so that they could buy more stuff. So, of course, I'm oversimplifying the story dramatically, but it's noticing how we seek out jobs. For what reason? Why do we seek out having a job? So that we can get more sensual pleasure, mostly. Of course, some of it is about getting by in the world, but getting by in the world actually doesn't take very much. It's quite minimal. But if we're caught up in buying a bunch of useless stuff, or we're caught up in going out on the town all the time, or if we're caught up in pursuing sensual pleasures of various sorts, well, that requires some extra income. It requires something above and beyond the bare minimum, something above and beyond the simple necessities of life. So for that, we spend a lot of time working, doing things which are not particularly pleasant, doing things which are not particularly enjoyable, doing things which we don't really want to be doing. And in the course of working, we often have to face all manner of unpleasant experiences. So here he mentions facing cold and heat, facing insects and wind and sunburn and reptiles, enduring hunger and thirst. So, for example, we've been doing a lot of work in the monastery yard, so working outside lately. So in the morning it's cold, in the afternoon it's hot. There's flies, no mosquitoes yet, fortunately, but there are flies. Sunburn, I got some sunburn. I got a sunburn right on the top of my head. And hunger and thirst. Yeah, if you work for a while, then you start getting hungry and thirsty. And you can't necessarily stop and take a break whenever you want to. If you do, then your boss might get upset. So it's acknowledging that we have to work in order to get the money that we need in order to pursue sensuality. And then the Buddha says, monks, if that gentleman's exertion, struggle, and effort does not produce wealth, he becomes sorrowful, weary, and aggrieved. He beats his chest and falls into confusion, thinking, my exertion was in vain, my effort was fruitless. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The mass of suffering which is caused by sensuality originates in sensuality as the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. In other words, in the pursuit of sensual pleasure, we go out and we get a job and we work really hard, but then we find that we're actually not making enough money to do all the sensual things that we want to do. And then we grieve and lament. It's like, oh, I don't have enough money to go to the bar. This is so terrible. Oh, I can't afford to buy more crap from Amazon. This is so bad. Well, dukkha. But what's the cause of the dukkha? Is the cause of the dukkha that you're not making as much money as you want to? No, the cause of the dukkha is the fact that we're craving sensual experiences. If we're not craving sensuality, then the proper question is simply, do I have enough to get by? And if the answer is yes, then that's good enough. That's it. However, the Buddha says, monks, if that gentleman's exertion, struggle, and effort does produce wealth, then he experiences pain and depression as a consequence of guarding his wealth, thinking, may the government not take my wealth, may thieves not take it, may fire not burn it, may water not sweep it away, may unloved heirs not take it. But despite his attempt to guard his wealth, the government takes it, or thieves take it, or fire burns it, or water sweeps it away, or unloved heirs take it. He becomes sorrowful, weary, and aggrieved. He beats his chest and falls into confusion, thinking, what once was mine is no longer mine. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The massive suffering which is caused by sensuality originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. So this is the case where one does accumulate some wealth through one's work, maybe makes a stockpile of nice things or gets a nice fat bank account, but then you lose it. Again, maybe a lot of it gets eaten up by taxes, or maybe the government confiscates it for one reason or another, or maybe thieves steal it from you, or maybe it gets destroyed in a fire, or flood, or some other natural disaster. So the monastery I used to live at is in an area that's prone to forest fires. And a few years ago, there was a major forest fire which destroyed most of the homes in the area. So a lot of people lost their homes and all of their possessions due to fire. So this is quite common. We work really hard to accumulate a lot of nice stuff, and then something out of our control takes it away from us. In truth, it was never ours in the first place. It's just a piece of samsara. And once again, why is this a problem? It's because of our craving for sensuality, our craving for sensual experiences. So then we get really disturbed when we lose the things that we accumulated, when we don't have access to them anymore. But if we practice contentment, if we're practicing unconditional happiness, so being happy without needing anything in order to be happy, then it doesn't matter. So every now and then I like to refer to the movie Fight Club as being a treasure store of Buddhist wisdom in between the horrific violence and all that. There's a surprising amount of Buddhist wisdom in there. So one of the key things that happens fairly early on in that story is that the main character's apartment catches fire and all of his possessions get burned up and destroyed. But then from that, he realizes the sense of freedom, that he's no longer weighed down by all the crap that he had bought and accumulated. He's no longer weighed down by his effort to try to carefully curate and design the furniture in his apartment. It just became meaningless. Like prior to that, the character was spending all this time trying to pick out exactly the right coffee table and exactly the right bookshelves and exactly the right way to arrange everything. And then bam, there's a fire and it's all destroyed. And it's like, oh, well, that's freeing. I don't have to worry about all that stuff anymore. So of course, it's better if we voluntarily renounce our attachment to stuff, our attachment to things. But if it happens against our will, then that also gives us an opportunity to change our attitude towards them, change our relationship with them. And may unloved heirs not take it. This is one that I find somewhat amusing. So perhaps you have relatives who want your things and you don't want them to have your things. And yet, nonetheless, they somehow wind up getting your things. It's like, But once again, what's the problem? The problem is that grasping, that craving, that stingy mind, that hoarding mind, the mind which is like, no, I want it. It's mine. It's for me. I can't let other people have it. So then the Buddha continues, giving some more on the drawbacks of sensuality. He says, furthermore, monks, these are caused by sensuality, originate in sensuality, are the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. Kings dispute with kings. Aristocrats dispute with aristocrats. Brahmins dispute with Brahmins. Householders dispute with householders. Mothers dispute with their children. Children dispute with their mothers. Fathers dispute with their children. Children dispute with their fathers. Brothers with brothers. Brothers with sisters. Sisters with brothers. Companions with companions. Because of that disputing, arguing, and contention, they attack each other with fists, stones, sticks, and knives. As a result, they undergo death or death-like pain. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The mass of suffering which is caused by sensuality originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. In other words, because of greed for sensual experiences, then we get caught up in violence, in fighting with each other, arguing with each other, even physically assaulting each other, even to the point of killing people out of greed and sensuality, out of greed for sensual experiences. So this is mind-blowing. The extent of hostility and violence that we're willing to go to in order to get or keep sources of sensual pleasure. And the next section is similar. And so I'll read the next two together because they're similar. Furthermore, monks, these are caused by sensuality, originate in sensuality, are the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. Having taken up sword and shield, having strapped on bow and quiver, they take both and charge into battle, amidst speeding arrows and spears, amidst flashing swords. There they are pierced by arrows, pierced by spears, and decapitated by swords. As a result, they undergo death or death-like pain. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. And the next section, similarly, having taken up sword and shield, strapped on bow and quiver, they charge at fortified strongholds, amidst speeding arrows and spears, amidst flashing swords. There they are pierced by arrows, pierced by spears, doused in caustic liquids, crushed by heavy weights, and decapitated by swords. As a result, they undergo death or death-like pain. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The mass of suffering which is caused by sensuality, originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. In other words, he's pointing to the fact that wars usually start because of greed. The people in charge of one government are filled with greed, and in order to get what they want, they order their soldiers to attack another government, to try to take by force what they want, or to try to compel another country to do what the first one wants. Again, you don't need to spend much time reading about the history of warfare in order to recognize the truth of this. So one king looks at a neighboring country and is like, oh, I want me some of that. And out go the armies, and lots of people get wounded and killed. Or it's like, the neighboring country has policies that are hurting my economy. So, of course, what's more important, economies or human lives? Well, we know what the Buddha would say. The Buddha would say that human lives are more important. But throughout human history, right up to today, in fact, lots of government officials seem to think that the economy is more important than human lives. So what do? Well, naturally, we go to war in order to try to force policy changes on other countries to bolster our economy. Why? out of craving for sensuality, so that we can have more money and more access to nice things. So he is pointing here once again to the fact that wars are predominantly caused by craving, by desire, by desire for sensuality, desire for wealth, desire for acquisition. And as a result, lots of people suffer terribly, experience wounds and death as a result. Then the Buddha continues, furthermore, monks, these are caused by sensuality, originate in sensuality, are the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. They break into houses, they plunder, they commit burglary, they commit highway robbery, they commit adultery. So in the pursuit of sensuality, people are willing to commit all kinds of crimes. So here he mentions different forms of theft and also adultery. So theft is about wanting to get things that you think will bring you more pleasure. And adultery is, of course, about breaking the third precept, violating the boundaries of relationships in order to have pleasant experiences. So it's all coming from sensual desire. And this continues, then after seizing them, the government inflicts various kinds of torture on them. It has them flogged with whips, beaten with sticks, beaten with batons. It cuts off their hands, their feet, their hands and feet, their ears, their nose, their ears and nose. And here it performs the name of a number of different torture techniques, which we don't actually have any clue what any of these terms mean. Some of them are evocative enough that you can come up in your imagination with what it's talking about. Others, we just have no idea what they're talking about. So it performs the vinegar bowl, the conch head, the eclipse mouth, the glowing necklace, the hand torch, the grass voice, the bark garment, the antelope, the meat hook, the coin, the lie dissolving, the twisting lock, the straw seat. So I don't know what any of those are, but they all sound pretty uncomfortable. So I'd quite happily avoid them. It douses them with hot oil, has them chewed on by dogs, impales them on a spike while they are still alive, and decapitates them. Actually, the decapitation sounds like the nicest of all of these. As a result, they undergo death or death-like pain. Monks, this is another visible drawback in relation to sensuality. The massive suffering which is caused by sensuality, originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. In other words, when we're overcome by sensual desire, then we commit all manner of crimes, which then leads to punishment from the government. And punishments from the government are often not fair. They're often not fun. So most of these tortures that are mentioned here are not currently particularly common, at least in Western countries. Not particularly common. But throughout human history, it's actually been quite common to use torture or mutilation or maiming as punishment for crimes. These days, it's become less common. Instead, we just give long prison sentences for the most part. But still, that's also a form of torture. And finally, one more. Furthermore, monks, these are caused by sensuality, originate in sensuality, are the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. They engage in physical misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. After engaging in physical, verbal, and mental misconduct, when they are separated from their bodies after death, they appear in deprivation, a bad destination, downfall, in hell. Monks, this is a future drawback in relation to sensuality. The massive suffering, which is caused by sensuality, originates in sensuality, is the consequence of sensuality, the cause of which is just sensuality. In other words, because of sensual desire, we engage in all manner of bad karma. So we do all kinds of unwholesome things with body, speech, and mind, breaking the precepts, hurting other people, pursuing harmful courses of action. And as a result, then we create bad karma, which leads to painful rebirth, unpleasant rebirth, even to the point of being born in hell realms, where we experience unimaginable pain and suffering for eons. Of course, eventually it comes to an end, as all things do. We might be reborn then in a higher realm. But nonetheless, even a year in a hell realm is a year of unimaginable torment. Then the Buddha says, monks, what is the escape in relation to sensuality? Monks, the destruction of desire and lust for sensuality, the abandoning of desire and lust for sensuality. This is the escape in relation to sensuality. Oh, that was easy. So all these horrible things he just talked about, the escape is really simple. Just remove your desire and lust for sensuality. That's it. Then you don't have to go through all this horrible torment. Just stop craving sensual experiences. Practice contentment and renunciation. And then you don't have to go through all this horrible torment he just talked about. Isn't that great? So easy. Then the Buddha says, monks, regarding those contemplatives and Brahmins who do not truly understand in relation to sensuality the gratification as the gratification, the drawback as the drawback, and the escape as the escape, it is impossible that they will themselves come to a complete understanding of sensuality, and that they will encourage others to practice similarly, so that they can also come to a complete understanding of sensuality. Monks, regarding those contemplatives and Brahmins who truly understand in relation to sensuality the gratification as the gratification, drawback as the drawback, and escape as the escape, it is possible that they will themselves come to a complete understanding of sensuality, and that they will encourage others to practice similarly, so that they can also come to complete understanding of sensuality. So here he's emphasizing this point, that it's only through thoroughly understanding gratification, drawback, and escape that one can really understand what sensuality is, and that one can guide others to come to an understanding of it as well. So here he is undermining the claim that was made by the wanderers of other religions, who claim that they also teach the complete understanding of sensuality. The Buddha is saying, no, actually, if you don't thoroughly understand gratification, drawback, and escape, then you don't completely understand sensuality. There's no way that you can get it or help others to get it either. So I think we'll go ahead and pause there and open up for questions if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Bhante, for sharing the teachings of the Buddha. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And Bradley just shared a story that just happened in Jamaica. It has a trigger warning, which is exactly like the medieval sort of tortures that were happening back at the time of the Buddha. So people can read it. Maybe I won't say it out loud.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, but he's saying they eventually let him down and bandaged his arm, but the whole time I was utterly horrified. Yeah, absolutely. And Bradley also shares that he's a greed type, so I need to read it constantly. So one day it will be absorbed.
Good.
Yes. And Bhante and I should read the Metta Sutta every day.
Yeah.
Over and over again. So one day we'll be absorbed. We're hate types. And Galaxy, welcome and Rupa, welcome, and Marielle, welcome, and Elaine, welcome. Lots of friends who have joined in. And Michael is asking, does the word strand here mean fetters as well?
Regarding the 5 strands of sensuality, So the word there is guna, which it literally means cord or string. So I interpret this just to basically mean the 5 varieties of sensuality, the 5 forms of sensuality. Guna can also mean quality. So the 5 qualities of sensuality, the 5 varieties of sensuality. But yeah, it could also be an implication there that these are 5 things that tie us down, 5 ways that we tie ourselves down. But I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it as meaning 5 varieties or forms of sensuality.
All right. And Marielle asks, so it's important to first connect with ourselves inside, or at least spiritually, and then to crave enough to get by?
Well, I don't recommend craving anything. But yeah, so through spiritual practice, we recognize that we don't actually need that much. So we are grateful for what we have, and we're content with just enough to get by. And if we have more than just enough, then we are grateful that we have more than enough. But at all times, recognizing that what we have might be lost at any time, and that's okay. Then there's no problem.
Marielle also asks, how can we have a love partnership but also not needing in a substantial level our partner?
So that's quite difficult. That's complicated. So when one is in a relationship, then yeah, usually there's a certain amount of sensual desire and attachment involved. So it's quite difficult to transcend that. But it's worth trying. So a while back, Ayya Soma gave a talk on love without attachment, which touched on this subject. So that's one you might want to go back and listen to and see what she had to say at that time. But yeah, one thing I recommend is try to use the relationship as a vehicle for cultivating loving kindness, compassion, generosity, equanimity, contentment. See it as a way that through being very closely connected with another person, you can be kind and generous and attentive to them. A way to cultivate letting go of self-centeredness and cultivate consideration. Okay.
And Kevin says, there's a bit of a paradox in these teachings in that going into homelessness is reliant on others not doing such.
So there's an interesting story where someone asked Ajahn Chah a similar question. They were saying, well, if everybody became a monk, then there would be nobody to feed the monks. And Ajahn Chah said, that's like an earthworm who thinks, I eat the dirt and I live in the dirt. What if I eat all the dirt? Where will I live? So he's saying, basically, you never need to worry about this because not everyone's going to become a monk. In fact, very few people become monks. So there will always, 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 always be lots of people who are not monks. Yeah, you don't need to worry about this issue, trust me.
And Ramon, sometimes I call him Ramon, sometimes Raymond. I am not quite sure how. What is the right pronunciation? Excuse me. Says, thank you for the analogy Bante in making Dhamma so digestible. I always thought the Matrix has a deep Buddhist meaning also.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah.
And Maria asks, how to deal with the treason from a person you deeply love? How to let go of whatever happened to have been different? There is no pleasure in the holding, but well, there's no real. But
So to some extent, we actually do need to be realistic. So If someone attacks you or bites you or hurts you in some way, then you need to be cautious around that person until they prove trustworthiness. Otherwise, you're just opening yourself up to get hurt again. So you do need to have a certain amount of wisdom in this. So recognizing that you shouldn't just blindly trust people. If somebody demonstrates that they are not trustworthy, then you don't place trust in them. It's quite simple. Until they prove that they're worthy of trust. So if somebody has, in fact, harmed you in some way, then don't open yourself up to them until they prove that they're not going to harm you anymore. So this is not holding on, it's just being wise. It's foolishness to repeatedly open yourself up to harm. At the same time, recognize that the person is lost in delusion, in defilements, that they're so overcome by confusion and strong habits that they're doing harmful things. So cultivate compassion for them and wish for them to overcome their defilements and delusions so that they can learn how to behave in a kind way, that they can learn how to be considerate towards others. But you can wish that from a safe distance. Like if you see a poisonous snake, then you think, oh, friend, may you be happy, may you be healthy, but you don't go and pet it on the head. You don't go and pick it up and snuggle it. You keep a safe distance from it as you wish for it to be happy and healthy and safe. You also wish for yourself to be happy, healthy, and safe, which necessitates keeping a distance from the snake. Okay?
And Bradley, so cute, he's such a great type, asks, how do we destroy and abandon desire and lust for sensuality? I see the drawbacks of certain experiences, and yet it's still difficult not to give in, like a fish that sees bait on a hook and bites it anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so keep focusing on the drawbacks of sensuality. And also focus on the gratification of spiritual practice. Notice how pleasant it feels when the mind is peaceful and clear. Notice how enjoyable it is to rest in equanimity. Notice how blissful contentment is. And focus on building up your samadhi. As your samadhi gets stronger, then you'll become less interested in sensual things. There's a couple places in the suttas where the Buddha says that the way to overcome sensual desire is through attaining jhana. Of course, it's not a permanent fix for the problem, but it does adjust one's priorities a bit. When one realizes that it's possible to have a very pleasant experience just through meditation practice, then the pursuit of sensuality starts to lose its specialness. Okay?
Great. Yeah, if you're a hate type, you always have the whole list of unpleasantness and drawbacks, even in really pleasant things. And also Karen Zhu is coming out as a hate type and is asking when we're doing our future metta study. Actually, it's next week. It's one of the paramis. Paramis. I always get the accent wrong. So next week there will be a metta special. And Ramon is in fact Ramon. Great with the Spanish accent. That makes my life much easier. And Mark says, recently in a relationship that was not working out, as I walked by my friend and saw her in the room, I was overwhelmed by their sadness, with their life and compassion took over rather suddenly. Completely changed my relationship with them, and we're friends to this day. It wasn't really me, but some sort of grace.
I would rather say that it's the fruit of your past development. So if we spend a lot of time sowing the seeds of kindness and compassion and sympathy, then that eventually blossoms in our hearts. And sometimes it does so at an unexpected moment when it seems to just happen all by itself. But it's still because we planted and watered those seeds for a long time. So what you're experiencing is the result of your past practice suddenly coming to fruit in a way that seems almost automatic. It's the same with samadhi practice, actually. Sometimes we struggle and struggle and struggle with meditation for years and years and years. And then one day we just sit down and seemingly without any effort, the mind just drops immediately into deep samadhi. And it's like, well, how did that happen? I struggled all those years and never got samadhi. Now I sit down and seemingly without any effort, it just appears to me. But the reason why it appeared effortlessly is because of all those years of struggle finally coming to a head. So it's the same. We plant the seeds of compassion and wisdom for years and years and years. And then one day it just seems to appear without any effort in the mind.
Great. And Bradley also put a construction work emoji followed by Jana on it. Great. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And Kevin says, not sure this is on topic. If so, please disregard. But did the Buddha ever address what to do if physically attacked? What does a practitioner do?
Run away. Well, there's the classic example is the simile of the saw, where the Buddha says, even if bandits were to seize you and start cutting off your arms and legs with a saw, then even then you should not have hatred for them, but rather you should cultivate a mind of loving kindness towards them. So that's the common one. But that's the case where you have no opportunity for escape. In the Vinaya, it does mention that when attacked, one should escape. One can try to escape. Protecting one's own welfare, protecting one's own health and safety, but optimally trying to escape in a way which doesn't cause harm, which doesn't involve hurting other people intentionally. Okay.
And Elaine says, Dear Venerables, from what you know of me, what type would you say I am? I have a thought I'm a combo of hate and greed, but would love to hear your thoughts, please.
You're almost certainly a delusion type.
Yes, because whenever you don't know what type you are, you're a delusion type.
Yeah, trust me, hate types and greed types, they know.
Yes.
Nobody has to tell them, they know. Delusion types are the ones who are like, I wonder what type I am. Yeah, delusion type.
And Marlando asks, I have a friend who is a bhikkhu in Michigan. He is by himself in a monastery due to the pandemic. I'm sending him vegan dana, but I would like to send him something that might be more pleasant to eat. Should I be so concerned? Is it allowable for him to even have a favorite snack? Or should I just send him rice? Do you have any suggestions? I don't want to be offensive. Aww.
Yeah, first off, that's very kind of you. It's very sweet, very thoughtful. It's great that you're supporting him. I actually know right now a bhikkhu in Michigan who's stranded by the pandemic, so we might even be thinking of the same person if this person is a Westerner. So what I actually recommend, and I recommend this for any monastic, by the way, is ask. Tell him, I want to make a special offering. What would you really appreciate? What would you like me to send? What would be of benefit to you? And of course, many monastics, the first time you ask, they will say anything is fine, I'm content with anything, because that's the standard monastic answer. So sometimes you have to ask 2 or 3 times and really emphasize that you want to know before they'll actually directly tell you. Unless you already, if you're already on very good terms with the monastic, sometimes they'll tell you with the first asking. But sometimes you have to ask 2 or 3 times before they'll actually give a straight answer. So yeah, just directly ask him. Tell him, I've been sending you food, but so far I've just been sending whatever I felt like sending. But I want to send something that you want, something that you would like, something that you would appreciate. What can I do? What can I send? Just ask.
Lane says, oh boy, am I a mess.
It's fine. Delusion types are normally very sweet people.
Yes, it's true. Some of the nicest to have around. Also greed types. So also greed types are very rare in the Buddhist world. And normally the majority are either aversive types or delusion types.
Yeah.
And Kevin says, don't fret, Elaine, we're all delusional. Yes, correct. Mayel says, where do we get the type words? I want to know which type I am, but I want to know the options first. It's greed, hatred, or delusion.
Yeah, there's only 3 types, and they're all bad. Anyway, there's actually internet quizzes which people have made up, which will try to calculate your type for you. But realistically, you know. Yeah. You just look at your mind and you ask yourself, what is my predominant tendency? Do I tend to fixate on what I like, on what's pleasant? Or do I tend to fixate on what I dislike, on what's unpleasant? Or am I pretty spacey and chaotic and random and don't really know? Then you're a delusion type. So usually you can tell if you look at your own mind. If you're really not sure, ask the people around you, and they probably know.
Kevin says, I'm pretty sure I'm a greed, aversion, delusion, and the fourth yet to be defined type. You're an aversive type. And yes, as Bhakti mentioned, Brownlee says, we all have greed, aversion, and delusion, but it's a matter of what seems the strongest. Elaine is asking, in a nutshell, please, how would you characterize a delusional type?
So we're getting a little bit off the topic of the sutta, by the way. So maybe we should rein it in.
The 3 types special.
Yeah, we should do a talk on it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll write it down.
That'll be a topic for an upcoming talk, the 3 types.
All right, and I think that's all for this morning. Let me write the 3 types. Oh, so cute. Mayel says, I'm delusional then.
Yes, I would agree with that assessment.
Yes, you're also very sweet and nice.
Yeah.
Actually, all Buddhist practitioners are.
For the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for practicing the Dharma and becoming less greedy, less hateful, and less delusional. And we will be cultivating more wisdom this evening because the subject matter will be delusion. Will be wisdom, which dispels delusion. So that will be the parami that we'll be studying this evening with either Bhante Sudaso or Ayasoma. Who will be the monk? We will only find out at 7:30 p.m. New York City time on BNN. All right. Well, have a great. Hope your day is fruitful and keep practicing the teachings of the Buddha. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.